Entering the atmosphere in T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello everyone, and welcome to a very special director's commentary that we have today over at Omega Metroid. We have got the one, the only, Milton Guasti, aka DoctorM64, aka the creator of another Metroid 2 remake, and multiple other great games, by the way, joining us today. Milton, thank you so much for being here with us. What an honor this is. Like I said to you earlier, I feel a little starstruck, to be honest with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. It's awesome to be here. This podcast is quite legendary. It has a huge, awesome history, and it's an honor to be here.
Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to do this with us, and I'm really excited actually because instead of a traditional interview, what I thought would be really cool is if we could harken back to like the DVDs of old and do a little director commentary. So Milton and I are actually going to watch a playthrough from start to finish, and 100% playthrough, by the way, of another Metroid 2 remake, AM2R as we'll be calling it here. This was played by our Omega Metroid colleague who goes by the handle name of Gameworm. And Milton, as you'll see, he is an absolutely awesome AM2R player, much better than I am. So I'll tell you what, if you're ready, why don't we hit play here, and then we can go ahead and get this show on the road.
As you please.
All right, so let's get started. And so one of the very first things that we see in the game here is a really cool, like, Super Metroid style opening that really kind of feels at home with the Super Metroid aesthetic, the similar intro there, like the gray intro. I really love that touch.
The one thing that I made a quite special emphasis was to synchronize this final slide whenever we introduce Samus into the picture with whenever her theme actually kicks in. And that's when we kind of reveal that, it was her that was actually giving the speech. This kind of reveal ended up being a bit confusing because I don't do the typical Super Metroid establishing shot that this is Samus speaking. But overall, I'm quite satisfied with this intro. I didn't want it to be super long, and overstayed its welcome.
Well, and a cool thing too about the game in general is that if you want to watch cutscenes, you can, and if you just want to get right to the action, you can also do so. I wanted to avoid, I guess, maybe some a beautiful background there, by the way. My goodness, I wanted to avoid maybe some questions that you have been asked before, but I do have to just start off with, why Metroid 2? What was it about Metroid 2: Return of Samus that was just like, this is the game that I'm going to remake?
Well, I never got myself too much into NES Droid, mostly because here in Argentina, the most popular AP system was the Famicom. And since the original release for Metroid was on the FDS, the Famicom Disk System, we only got cartridges here in Argentina. The NES was not very popular, and I was able to play really awesome NES games back in the day, but Metroid was not one of them, neither was Zelda. So by the time I did discover the Metroid franchise, I was able to try out Metroid Zero Mission, and I was in love. I wanted to say, oh, okay, I want to see how this moves on the timeline, because I kind of knew that Metroid was a continuous story instead of being something that's a little
bit more like
isolated, like Zelda.
Is its own thing.
Exactly. So when I tried Metroid 2, it was a product of its time, and it didn't age as well as Super Metroid. So I thought it was going to be an interesting project to get myself into programming and game design, and I certainly underestimated the project.
Well, an interesting project to say the least here. I've always actually thought, because Super Metroid was my first game, AM2R really, to me, felt like like the Super Metroid sequel, even though it came out before. Like it felt like such a great homage to that game that I remember just being blown away the first time that I played it, how faithful it was.
Yeah, the thing is, the Super Metroid didn't click for me that much, mostly because I did try it out briefly, but I went with the wrong mindset. I was, treating it like as if it was some sort of action game, kind of like Torigan, and the different controls and the confusing structure felt, very unappealing for me that time. But it's the kind of game that you need to actually give it a try for reals and sit down and properly play. And once I did that, it was amazing.
Yeah, I fell in love the first time that I played it. But I did fall in love with Metroid 2, like on the Game Boy too. I thought that it was an exceptional Game Boy game, and one of the things that I love, and we're seeing an enemy here called a Mumbo, which kind of looks like Samus's ship. I just loved all the crazy enemies and stuff that were that were in that game, and it just brings me it makes me smile to see them so updated, faithfully recreated here. I guess what was that process like? Did you have any enemies that stuck out for you in the original Metroid 2? Were there any that were too difficult to kind of reimagine in AM2R?
It certainly helped that the Metroid 2 manual had very awesome illustrations that provided a nice guideline on what the actual vision for these things were, because the actual artwork in the original game, there is a lot of expression there, but it's certainly limited within the details and the colors that we could imagine. But yeah, I was super lucky that the project was quite popular early on, and many talented people did offer their help, including sprite artists.
Yeah.
And it's always been a nice back and forth process on seeing what actually works, what also has the same style as Zero Mission. And it was really nice to figure out how to actually develop the visual style, not only of the enemies, but also of the tile work, because those had to blend together and pretty much look like they belong in the same place.
Yeah, and we're kind of seeing that right now even, and this is, I'm sure, low-hanging fruit because we're in the Golden Temple, but it is very reminiscent of Chozodia from Metroid Zero Mission as well. It's got that same kind of Chozo imagery, which I really like. I gotta be honest with you, actually. The music here that we're listening to as well in the Golden Temple is one of my favorite tracks in Metroid. I just love this track, and you guys did such a great job just kind of really nailing, I think, the music, the 2D vibe, but implementing some Metroid Prime style sounds in there. It's just really exceptional. I really like it a lot.
Thanks. I pretty much composed the majority of the entire soundtrack. The thing is, I'm actually a sound designer and music producer originally, and much of this project came about because I had a lot of free time in my recording studio. Not that many customers back then. This particular song is a variation of an arrangement by Darren Kerwin, the webmaster for Shine Sparkers.
Yes, yeah.
He's a super talented musician, and he did provide the arrangement that we're going to be hearing later on the lower part of this area. And from that arrangement, I was able to make this one that we're now hearing. And the Prime instrumentation is really, really awesome. It certainly helps that the electronic tone is easier for me to work with. If it had to be something that's a bit more orchestral, I wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, it's just that signature sound, like that synthy patch. It sounds so great. You know what? One other thing I should actually say that I remember appreciating about AM2R when I first played it is this hallway that we're in right here. There's a bunch of missile expansions, but you did add kind of a little bit of a challenge to get them, because in the original Metroid 2, you simply just walk in and you grab them. So I thought that was pretty cool as well. But going back to the music, sorry, just for a quick second, I understand that you use the Chozo Ruins drum bass line in that theme. Is that correct?
Sorry?
So I have been told that in this particular theme we have a rearrangement of some of the drum lines that was found in the Chozo Ruins track from Metroid Prime. I was going to ask you if that is true or if that's an urban legend.
Oh no, yes, there is a part that you're going to be finding a little bit of a snare that's very particular, and I did try to imitate it without using the same sample, because trying to extract the sample from finished music was quite difficult back in the day, and it wasn't well known which sample library Retro was using by the time. So I did my try, and it's kind of recognizable but distinct enough, so it still has its own personality.
I would say so. I just love I love this track. You're probably gonna hear me say that a couple times actually as we get further into the game. You know what? Actually, that's a great thing that you just brought up was personality. One of the things that I just really love about AM2R and have always appreciated is you went out of your way to give each area like a theme, a name, which doesn't sound like much, but in other interpretations we just have Area 1 or Area 2 or Phase 3 or whatever have you. I guess like was that kind of an important thing to you to make sure that each area kind of had its own identity, for lack of a better term?
Well, whenever you see a screenshot from Zero Mission, you most likely can immediately identify where the area is. When you see a screenshot from Super Metroid, it's very clear. Both the tile sets, the enemies, it's very easy to identify. And in most cases, if there are any particular landmarks, you know exactly in the map where that screenshot is being taken. And I wanted to evoke that kind of same feeling, as in these places need to feel unique, right? And it was interesting to actually figure out something that's a bit more functional from the storytelling perspective. Not instead of just being distinct places, but try to theme them as something that would actually make sense now that we know how the story goes in this particular location. We know why the metros were created. We know that the Joso were the ones behind it all. And these facilities, these places that are distributed throughout this cave system, they need to perform some sort of function, and that was really fun. I may have not expanded that much as I wanted, but yeah. Besides feeling visually distinct, they do serve a purpose story-wise.
Yeah, and I feel like that, like, to your point, like part of the fun, but part of the challenge of the original Metroid 2 is everything looks so similar that, again, like I remember the first time I played this game, I was just like, oh my god, this is so cool that each area is really distinct. And like you said, like I can look at a screenshot and be like, oh, it's the tower, oh, it's the distribution center, and I think that was like an underrated, but at least for me, just like a really important thing that helped to give a lot of personality. So I really love that was a focus. I think that's so cool. So we're watching Samus take on some Alpha Metroids here. I gotta ask you, Milton, what was your favorite Metroid evolution from maybe both, like just as a fan of Metroid and then like programming for this game?
Okay, the alphas were the ones that were the most fun because they repeat so much. I had to pretty much make some parameters to make them feel distinct one from each other. Some of these are a bit more aggressive, some of these are a bit more shy and slower, others have different attacks that others don't perform, so I did have to add a lot of variety, mostly because it's super repetitive. That, and also add a little bit of variety in the actual environments whenever you're actually fighting them. The environments are going to be becoming a little bit more challenging and dangerous later on. But yeah, those were the ones that I had the most fun, making them distinct. The rest of the Metroids are a bit more scarce, so just being there, it's enough to give variety.
And we got to talk about this boss, because this is just a cool, again, very Chozodia style boss here that we have going on. What was the inspiration for the Ancient Guardian? It does invoke, while being a completely separate boss fight, it does kind of remind me of that Chozo test right before you get your power suit back from Zero Mission.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a set piece trying to. So the original idea for the Joso Temple was to make it a bit more Indiana Jonesy, as in having contraptions, moving floors, that kind of stuff, right? And turns out that the platform engine I was using with GameMaker was not behaving that well with moving objects.
Right.
So whenever I did try to make things, it had to be very limited, and we only get to see one or two of those mechanisms that made the cut. The idea was to actually finish it off with this spike trap that was actually, something that's adding this time pressure. And it was trying to give the player something that they were not totally expecting, because, this was not in the original
game, yeah.
Exactly.
And we see that a few different times, which I really think works to great effect here. Because in Metroid 2, you kind of fight the original Metroids, and you do have the Arachnus fight, but that, other than that, that's kind of it. So I'll keep on saying it, but I remember the first time playing it, just be like, oh, this is so cool that there was a boss here that I wasn't expecting. So I'll probably be picking your brain about a few different bosses that we got here, Milton.
The one thing that I wanted to be is avoid being predictable.
Yeah.
The one thing that's always awesome is the sense of wonder and discovery. And by that point, you had explored the Joso Temple, which is very faithful to the original. The entire layout is following quite closely, and even if there are a couple of differences here and there, it follows the original layout very closely. And from that point on, where that boss fight says, okay, things are likely to be a bit different, even if there are many landmarks that match the original. So, that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the game.
And we're in the Hydro Station right now, which I mean is just... I feel like if you haven't played Metroid 2 in a long time, you might not realize how faithful the layout here really is. But I mean, it's really just bang on. It's incredible. Again, while being faithful to the original game, it's just an incredible vibe and identity of its own. And I bet you a lot of people would tell you this is probably their favorite track in the game. I remember it really stuck out for me the first time I heard it.
I get that very often, and this happens to be my favorite one too.
I mean, what's not to like? It sounds like Metroid Prime, but it's a cool remix from Super Metroid. It's good stuff. And speaking of good stuff, Arachnus. I got a soft spot for Arachnus here. I kind of love him that he just shows up and he's kind of easy to beat in most games, although not necessarily this game. I really like what you did with the electric conduits on the wall there to give this boss fight a little bit more oomph to it. I thought that was really cool.
I mean, there's certainly quite a lot of Mega Man inspirations here, as in a duel with a very awesome creature that has a varied moveset. And the actual gimmick was something that I thought it would kind of make sense. If you use a bomb to propel some spherical thing upwards, it might work on this. And it also resonates with the original. You had to use bombs to defeat the original one in the Game Boy. So, this was just a different contextualization of the same premise. But with a little bit more, more flashy attacks and a bit more of a dangerous creature.
Yeah, I felt like I felt like it was just a small thing, but it added a lot to that fight. Milton, I have a question. The enemy that we just passed was an enemy called the Blob Thrower. Correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like, was that in the original version of AM2R, or was that maybe added after the fact by updates?
That was added by the awesome community that's maintaining the project right now.
That's what I thought, yeah, because I actually, to be honest, I just recently played the newer version of AM2R, and I saw the Blob Thrower, and it was it's kind of an exciting moment for me, because I was like, oh, cool, look at that guy, which I always thought was cool. So we're down in the pipes here, and again, this is just astonishingly faithful to at the admittedly very complex layout of the map from the original Metroid 2. I guess I just really love the idea to have the pipelines kind of be how you get around in here. It feels very on theme and on point.
That came from the necessity of not getting bored on traversing those upwards, because whenever you need to go up those long pipes using the spider ball, it's so slow and time consuming. One screen, that's fine, but 3 screens, that's a bit much.
Yeah.
So I didn't want people to just, lose their focus.
Well, it looks cool, and you're right, actually. You know what? Let me ask you, actually, because I've never been the biggest fan of the Spider Ball in Metroid 2, in any other interpretations of that game. I thought it was just a little bit slow, to your point. I really like, though, that, I mean, you get the Spider Ball here, but it's not too long after that we acquire the Space Jump. I guess, in terms of the Spider Ball, what are your thoughts on that power-up, and, did it give you any, I guess, challenges in terms of level design or anything like that, or was it kind of smooth sailing with that?
Level design wasn't that big of a deal, because from the get-go, once you get the bombs, you can infinite bomb jump, like in Zero Mission. So you can pretty much get infinite verticality from pretty much anywhere, right? And the only places where I do limit their usage is using some spikes later in this bigger cave outside of this facility. Besides that, I don't constrain the player that much, and pretty much in the next area you're going to be getting space jump anyways, so the verticality that would actually be useful to get isn't that immediate. So I didn't find myself needing to limit the usage of the spider ball itself. The one thing that was super challenging was the technical side. I had to reprogram that thing about 3 times differently, mostly because detecting geometry around the player is super complex. There are so many edge cases, and as soon as I became a better programmer, I would actually revisit this mechanic and actually make it more solid and less jank. And
the stuff you don't think about, I guess, when you're playing a game like that. It seems so natural in the game.
Yeah, my actual objective with this was to actually make it faster, but because of the way the collision is detected, I can only move 1 pixel per frame. So even if I try to duplicate that or just make sub pixels or whatever, it would break apart.
Oh my goodness! Well, hey, I mean, you pulled it off because I mean, it is faster and it's more seamless than in other games. And yeah, I mean, like, I always did appreciate that the space jump wasn't too far away because I'd prefer to fly than crawl for sure. And let me ask you another question, I guess, kind of on that same note. Did adding in like wall jumping and specifically like single wall jumping, did that kind of give you any issues at all? Kind of on that same vein?
Not at all. I mean, it would be a different way to get some verticality for people that really don't prefer to use bomb jumping. It was just making it feel like a Zero Mission that was a bit challenging. Whenever you press to the opposite side, whenever you're hugging a wall, there's a couple of frames of a buffer that you're not moving away from the wall at all. So it's like the walls are kind of sticky in some situations. Right. That is to actually facilitate the actual wall jump and not, sticking out from the wall the moment that you press the opposite side. Those small quality of life things are pretty much invisible for the casual player, but people that actually know the physics of Zero Mission, they can actually, wall jump pretty naturally.
Yeah, that's so cool just to hear about all like this kind of inside programming that no one would ever think, myself included, would never think about. I think that's just like so, I don't know, so interesting. So like I've said a few times here, like I think that people might underestimate how faithful this game actually is to the original layout of Metroid 2. One of the coolest examples I think of that is actually coming up here in just a quick second when we nab the various suit, because for whatever reason in the original game they also didn't have the various suit of the Chozo statue. It was in that room with all little bubbles or whatever it is they happen to be there. I just like a really cool touch for fans of the original game that no one else might look for it, but if you were a fan of it, you probably really appreciate it.
I mean, this was a very iconic moment. It was one of those, moments that are actually very distinct from the game, and there is absolutely no other moment like this in any of the Metroid games where you're not getting the power up right away and you need to, find it later on. So yeah, I did my best to actually replicate that and pay it a little more homage.
Yeah, and just a cool touch that I like to see in the game. This Alpha Metroid, by the way, the one that our player Gameworm had already defeated, this one always gives me problems. I love the extra challenge of trying to fight it in the water. It doesn't seem like it should make a big difference, but man, does it make it a lot more tough.
Yes, and then again, I did limit myself to not play with water that much because I always find water levels super annoying. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of water later on, so yeah, at least this is going to be a bit much here, mostly thematically, to justify that there are actually pipes, because if there is no water, we don't need pipes and the entire facility.
And again, just like a really, I feel like it just adds a lot to add a little personality. Like each area kind of has its own theme or its own gimmick or something like that. I feel like it definitely kind of breaks up, not like like that Metroid 2, the original, was monotonous. I don't think it was, but it certainly does give it a little bit more flavor.
Certainly, and it's always nice to actually, get a little bit more of something unique that you don't see in other places.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that because we have a couple of those gameplay deviations, I guess, coming up in a little bit here. I guess, while we're hunting in the depths of the Hydro Station here, we got a couple of Metroids to go ahead and eliminate. Let me ask you another question. And this is just a personal thing, so I'll get your thought on it, Milton. But I remember I've always kind of thought in my mind that I always thought that this game, Metroid 2, would have actually been a bigger success if it released on the Super Nintendo instead of the Game Boy. And when I saw AM2R for the first time, I was like, man, this is exactly what I thought the game should have been back in, at the time when it was released, if it came out for the Super Nintendo. I guess what are your thoughts on that, or I guess what are your thoughts on I guess Metroid in general, the series? It's no one would say that it's necessarily one of Nintendo's biggest series, but I think a lot of people would say it's one of Nintendo's best. Just thoughts, I guess, on the series, and maybe if Metroid 2 would have been, I guess, different, or the legacy would have been different if it was released on the Super Nintendo.
That would certainly be quite an interesting alternate reality. I mean, the timing would need to be allowing the Super Nintendo to be even released, and the gap between Metroid games would be pretty huge.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, it would have appeared earlier in the console's lifespan, I guess, and that would actually may have changed the presentation, the scope, and I'm not sure if at the beginning of the SNES lifespan there were cartridges big enough to house Super Metroid. I think it was 96 megabits or something. It was huge, and I'm pretty sure that that technical hurdle was something that was able to be tackled later in the console's life.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So it poses quite interesting set of questions.
Yeah, it's an interesting hypothetical, I think, but I don't know, one that has intrigued me over the years. We have our first Gamma Metroid that we are fighting here. For my money, Milton, I actually think that the Gamma Metroids are the most difficult of all the Metroids, because, by the time that you get to some of the later Metroids, your powers have increased. I have a hard time with some of these Gamma Metroids, I gotta say.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make them with the sense of personal space. They like to hug you very frequently.
They do, and they have their little lightning attacks, and often I am laid out on the floor trying to fight these guys. So you did good making them feel dangerous, I'll tell you that.
It certainly escalates the challenge, but the thing is, since the environment becomes also part of the fight later on, trying to get some distance becomes in the border of actually kind of annoying, but still pretty engaging.
Well, we are leaving the Hydro Station. We've got all the Metroids defeated. I was going to ask you too. I feel like I saw this on Twitter maybe years ago, and it was a post from you. And this was after, another interpretation of this game, the official one, Metroid: Samus Returns from Nintendo, came out. And I remember one of the things that, which is a game that I love as well, and I believe that you do as well. One of the things that I thought was pretty cool about that game is that one of the, I guess, the justifications that they used for, these earthquakes happening is that there was Chozo seals where you needed to put in the DNA. I thought that was always kind of a neat little touch. I guess, was there ever any thought about, trying to explain, why the earthquakes were happening?
It did cross my mind. And then again, I wanted to be super respectful with the franchise on how much I would actually add to the content. I try to imagine also this as what if in an alternate reality, Nintendo would actually remake Metroid 2 with zero mission intent, right? And I tried to stick to the guidelines of what you can actually observe by seeing their games in the franchise, right? So one of the things that is always been a mystery is, these earthquakes, right? There are theories about it being the queen that's being angry or something. And I wanted to keep it just as mysterious as it's always been. I'm pretty sure I'm not in the position to try to answer those questions. I just present them in the same way as the original did, and let the players, present their hypothesis.
Yeah. And I think I would probably, I mean, if I could ever have the skills to make a game, I'd probably do exactly that. But it was an interesting thing that I had never considered, because you're right. Like, my interpretation always been the queen was maybe upset that her babies were being eliminated here by Samus. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, and the actual official Joso devices, that's genius.
Yeah.
But then again, that's being spearheaded by people that have the authority to change the formula and the actual storytelling. And it's amazing to see this different point of view.
Well, here we go. Speaking of amazing, I want to say this has got to be my favorite just boss fight in the game. I think this fight is so cool. I gotta admit, I have a soft spot for Torizo. He's one of my favorite bosses from Super Metroid, so I was extremely happy to see a Torizo pop back here. Because, I mean, it makes all the sense to have one on a Chozo planet. But man, this boss fight is about to get taken to the next level in just a quick second here. And maybe one of the best examples of using a space jump and implementing it into a boss fight that I can think of in, like, Metroid games at all. Like, just what a cool fight. You gotta talk me through the inspiration for this.
So, a little bit of a theme that I want to have with this particular game is, if you see something that feels familiar, it needs to feel different in some way. And this resonates with Arachnus, and also with the Queen, as you're going to be seeing later. One thing that I wanted to keep as a homage, and also as a technical limitation, is the way that the animations are made. Whenever you saw this guy walking, he has very similar keyframes that were inspired by his original Super Metroid appearance. Again, I did try to actually make a skeletal animation system very early on this, and it looked so strange. It didn't feel like Torizo. So part of that jerkiness that you see in the animation on the first phase is, trying to be faithful to how he felt in Super Metroid.
Almost like a zombie, in a couple of different ways, because he moves very strangely in that game. I thought that was...
he looks like stop motion,
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, actually. That's a fantastic way to put it. Man, just again, like, as someone... So I have made maps, I've written guides for the original Metroid 2. I'm always just continually blown away by, like, how much this layout, while being like a completely different game, is so, like, just faithful to everything that was laid out in that game. I just think it's cool.
And I'm pretty sure you may have your objections and your own personal takes on how you have interpreted these locations instead.
Which is a pretty cool thing, because, like, you can see, like, the original, like, empty space in the original Metroid 2, and yeah, you can fill that in with your mind, and I don't know, I felt like when I saw AM2R for the first time, it felt very natural. Like, yes, this is the original intent of the game, which I think is, like, a really, like, great testament to you and your team for building that and making it feel so natural. This Gamma Metroid, by the way, this guy, he is a pain in the butt. This is my least favorite Gamma Metroid in the game.
Yeah, they start to get annoying from this point on.
Yeah. Well, we are of course in the industrial complex here, and I was going to ask you a question. Actually, we're talking about the map of the game, and again, a lot of people probably don't understand, like, how faithful it is, and one of the things that I actually truly didn't understand until I went ahead and, like, made a map for the original Metroid 2 is that if you were to put that map on like a standard grid, like we would see, other 2D maps, it actually doesn't fit together. There's a lot of overlap there. Was that like a challenge in making the level design here, which clearly, there's no overlap on your game?
Rearranging things to make it make sense in a grid that was super simple. Actually adding the filler necessary to connect all of those and adding content to those filler areas, that was a bit challenging. But then again, that's mostly on the very lowest part that connects from the final area to the Queen Nest.
Right.
That's a huge stretch of caves that were pretty much placed there just to compensate all of the movement that had to be done.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, it is pretty like impressive, to be honest. And I remember I had a heck of a time trying to make a map that accurately showcased where everything was. So I always, that stuck out to me again as something I appreciated more and more as I started to really get more familiar with the original Metroid 2. This is a cool enemy too, by the way. I love this enemy.
Thanks. By this time, these guys are either invincible, like the lava thingy, or take up a lot of missiles. So maneuvering around them is quite an option.
Well, we are navigating the industrial complex here. I wanted to, I guess, to jump ahead here and talk about something that we're going to see coming up here pretty quickly. And that was one of my favorite parts of AM2R, which is when you take control of our pal Skippy the robot. and I got a bunch of questions about Skippy, but first and foremost, like, we actually see this a few times during the game where, like, there's I guess, like, I would call them gameplay deviations, where instead of just like the regular gameplay, you're taking control of Skippy, or you're in the drill or something like that. I guess I wanted to ask Milton, like, how it seems like you went out of your way to kind of try and put in those little segments to keep the gameplay, I guess, like, kind of keep the player on your toes. Was that, I'm assuming, intentional?
Well, for every area, I wanted to add something that's mechanical to, interact with the player in a distinct way that doesn't happen anywhere else, right? So the first area was supposed to be having traps and moving walls and things that were more, temple-like, not that much survived. The second area has these pipes that shoot you around, and you're part of you're just riding the current. This area, since the theme was supposed to be like a road factory that pretty much produces the mechanical contraptions that are distributed around the planet, it would be pretty much like assembly lines, tools, and moving things like we're seeing now. This was the main gimmick, and I was going to be distributing these assets more through the facility, but the timing didn't clash well with the speed booster, and it ended up being just a timing challenge. Just wait for the thing to not shoot you, and that's it. And the idea, instead of Skippy, the original idea was to actually introduce the super missiles by using some sort of crane. Kind of like a crane game. You need to pretty much position the crane, grab the missile, and then maneuver it avoid the obstacles. It was very lame. It didn't fit the theme. And the good thing is they scrapped that idea before I had to produce the assets of that crane. So the idea came pretty much because when I saw the sprite of this particular enemy, it did kind of look like a crane, as in, it's got like little claws. Maybe this can actually grab things. So, yeah, it was actually awesome to reuse the same enemy logic, but in a different context. We are just controlling the thing ourselves. So implementing the guy was super easy. Actually making a layout that made sense and wasn't super tedious, that took a couple of revisions.
Yeah, I was just like, I mean, this part obviously just sticks out because it's such a cool little deviation of what what you're doing in terms of like controlling Samus. It's funny because this enemy in like the context of the industrial complex is a really tough enemy, I've always thought, but like there's something about this little guy that's just so cute and charming that you can't just you can't help but fall in love with the little guy.
I mean, he certainly looks friendly with the red, with the green eye instead of red.
Yeah, he's hopping around. He's carrying your super missiles. He looks like a friendly guy. My next question for you, and I'm sure you've been asked this a lot. Skippy the robot, the fan game that you made to celebrate the anniversary. What's going on with Skippy the Robot 2? Is there ever a sequel coming out for that?
It's complicated.
Wow.
Turns out actually making some sort of physics platformer that's not super frustrating takes a lot of revisions on level design. And even if the current game that only has 3 episodes with 10 levels each. Making those levels was so challenging. I did shuffle the idea of making a proper full game that actually has better visuals and shows a bit more of the screen. But yeah, it's all still very conceptual. And then again, it depends on my very scarce free time.
Yeah, fair enough. And I gotta say, I'm charmed by Skippy the robot. I've always really enjoyed him. So for some of those, like, less is more too. I think that like little levels and stuff is exactly kind of what the best way to show off that those physics are, because they're different physics than we're used to here for sure. All right, well, we are of course just acquired the super missiles from our pal Skippy. I was gonna ask you a question. What is your preferred method of super missile? Do you prefer kind of the Super Metroid style where they're separate from missiles? Or are you kind of a fan more of the Metroid Fusion style where they're just kind of like combined into the regular missiles? Do you have a preference?
For me personally, I like the Fusion version because it feels like an upgrade that makes you powerful without having to switch to anything else. In this particular project, it didn't make any sense because half of the challenge of this particular game is ammunition management. You need to be able to, survive with enough missiles to actually exterminate the Metroids. And if you stumble upon one with not enough missiles, it's complicated. That's when the tension comes. And super missiles are pretty much a guaranteed way to do 3 times more damage, which actually makes you really, really aim for that shot.
Yeah, and of course we would see other interpretations kind of stick with that same logic, which I think for this game makes a lot of sense. I'm probably with you. Generally speaking, I would go for the Metroid Fusion style, but yeah, it does seem to make a lot more sense right here to really have that like trump card, that ace in the hole for some of the tougher Metroids, because you certainly need them in definitely some of the later fights, as we'll get to.
Certainly, and one of the things that I really did underestimate is how tedious the later Metroids become if you run out of super missiles.
It can be tough, it can be tough.
Yeah.
Well, look at that Gamma Metroid. I was talking about how much trouble he gave me, and our Game Worm here just blasted away with 2 perfectly placed shots. I have a real tough time hitting the Gamma Metroids where I need to, I gotta say, speaking of ammo management.
Yeah, the hitbox is a bit dodgy. That's something that was left pending to improve. But then again, it's likely that the community is able to improve it later on.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? The thing about, I feel like, most of the Metroid fights, even that I struggle with, is like, it's not that the game is unfair. It's just that your skills aren't, or I'll speak for myself, my skill is that I just put the shot in the wrong place. So I always appreciate that about games that I find challenging, is like, when they're challenging but fair, like if you've made a mistake, it's because I've made a mistake.
Yes, but that makes a lot of sense in controlled environments where the actual duel is the focus. Now that you have to contend with also the environment, it becomes it leads more in the territory of being a bit more unfair.
We are about to descend into the depths of the industrial complex. Probably one of the most creepy locations in the game. Very atmospheric here. Very unlike a lot of what you see in the game. And I guess I'm going to ask you, I guess, a technical question here, because I know nothing about video game development, but I guess, like, walk me through, like, the challenges, if there were any, of, like, creating this kind of, like, moody, dark atmosphere with all this, like, really cool lighting that really kind of gives it a little bit of punch when you watch it and when you play it.
Well, technically speaking, it's not a very sophisticated system. It's pretty much defining light spots to, stand out besides the rest of the environment. So some objects are going to be emitting a ring of light, and that's pretty much it. The one thing that was super challenging is resisting the urge to use this everywhere.
I guess,
because, it actually adds a lot of atmosphere. But then again, part of the charm that this game has is how the environments are very readable. And the one thing that the only trade-off that there is with all of this moody lighting, and especially whenever there is pitch black darkness, is that your vision radius is very reduced, and that affects the pacing of the game. If you cannot see where you're going, it's harder to actually explore new places with a decent pacing. So I wanted to actually keep it centralized here, and if I'm going, dark, I'm going full dark then, and then you're going to be ambushed, and that's part of the actual tension that I want to give the player. But then again, this is the kind of thing that kind of overstays its welcome. There was another fun game that did this kind of lighting tricks very early, and it felt very tiring and very tense to actually be several minutes, different rooms with this limited visibility. The mood is awesome, but then again, if you try to sustain this over a longer gameplay session, it becomes very demanding.
It almost, what you're describing almost reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever played Alien Isolation, which is a really cool Metroidvania, but what you're saying kind of reminds me of that too, because it's a very tense game, and that tenseness lasts for, pretty much the whole game, so it is tough to play for a long period of time. Eventually you need to take a break, so that makes total sense actually to me.
We really need a director's cut that shaves off 5 hours of the game.
Yeah, right. I liked Alien Isolation, but I do have to admit, I think it goes just a touch too long. You know what?
Yeah,
actually,
the part when you need to avoid all of the working Joes,
yeah,
that's like, okay, this is fine, this is padding, but whatever.
I would be, obviously remiss if I didn't ask you. I'm a big Alien fan. Yeah, surprise, because I'm a big Metroid fan. Are you a fan of the Alien franchise as well?
I'm pretty selective. I really consider Alien and Aliens pretty much the peak of the franchise. The rest is sounds very spin-offy, including Alien 3.
I would agree with Alien 3. I actually would probably say that's my least favorite one, but yeah, it's definitely got it's definitely got some similar vibes to this area right here, Alien Isolation and some of the Alien franchise, because this is dark, it's got that kind of green aesthetic, very, very creepy. But again, very faithful to the tunnels that you found in Metroid 2.
Yes, and I did my best to actually provide some light sources to actually guide a little bit of the navigation. Totally blind here. But yeah, the idea is that it all builds up to this particular fight that is pretty much pitch black, and you don't get to see Metroid because he's not a light source, unless he's attacking. But again, a couple of super kills and it's over.
So we had someone playing this game that is just like fantastic at it. That would have lasted 5 minutes if that was me playing fighting that Gamma Metroid there. You know what, actually, let me ask you another question, because we just saw Samus take a little bit of a shortcut back up, and those shortcuts exist, like, multiple places in this game. We saw a couple at the beginning of the game. I guess, like, did you have a speed running component in mind when you were designing the levels here? Obviously, Metroid is pretty renowned for its speed running. In this game, obviously gives players a lot of tools to be able to shortcut and really be efficient with their movements. Was that a consideration when you were designing the levels?
It was a consideration, but not at the level of Zero Mission.
I see.
Zero Mission has very intricate speedrunning only shortcuts that are actually, the ones that allow you to sequence break, right? So even if this is a lot more linear experience, there are a couple of shortcuts here and there that are more of a quality of life. Having to climb that intricate passage again upwards in pitch black because you got rid of all the light sources would be more time consuming and tedious than challenging. So yeah, whenever it makes sense, I do try to add a shortcut or two.
Oh, that's because I've never been one for speedrunning, although I will say 2D Metroid, Super Metroid in particular, is one game that I do enjoy kind of trying to run as quickly as I can. It gives me a little bit of satisfaction, so I thought it was really cool to see that, I guess, like, almost legacy, so to speak, of speedrunning in Metroid, again, present here. I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, it also helps that a couple of the beta testers were very avid speedrunners, and they broke my game in ways that I have never imagined. So
well, there you
it was
go.
nice to actually, take them into consideration for whenever they need to speedrun this game too.
I gotta say, I love this area, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later once we get to the hideout. But I love this area for a couple of reasons. Number one, actually, is what we're seeing right now: the two Alpha Metroid fights. You know, you were kind of saying earlier that they wanted to give the Alpha Metroids a little bit more punch, and one thing that I think like does a really great job of that is having two of them attack you at the same time. I remember feeling like that was like, oh wow, like this is a real cool challenge. So I love that, but I also just love seeing like the remnants of the search and rescue team and all of the kind of stuff that's hinted at in the manual, but you don't necessarily get to see. I mean, like how fun was that? Just kind of playing around and throwing that kind of stuff in there.
It was certainly interesting, and the challenge was actually choosing what not to show.
Okay.
There's so there was a little bit of a proposal on the role of the Federation and how far would they actually make it, and not showing that much means that the production is going to be smoother because you don't need to produce that many assets, and it was also nice to actually have a sense of mystery. Just if the entirety of the original game did not mention them outside of the manual, and it also worked. Here I don't need to explain that much, especially if I'm going to be making a dedicated area that pretty much shows the entire ship where they actually came from. So limiting the exposure to the actual team and how far they made it, that was something that was pretty much decided on the fly. But there were some versions of the story that actually hinted at more involvement from the Federation, but we actually wanted to keep it more simple and more faithful to the original, just to not overcomplicate things.
Okay, that's a really cool tidbit. That's really interesting. Well, here we go again. We're seeing kind of another kind of cool, I guess, deviation from what's called the normal gameplay that you typically do. I love this big drill that's just drilling rock. It's a really satisfying crunch, isn't it? That it's just like as we're grinding away at these rocks.
It was something that gives this particular location something that's a bit more, unique, because this is a part of these two side caves that were very, very short areas in the original, and this makes them, a bit more unique.
Yeah. How did you balance the idea of like we want to? Obviously, we want to expand some areas, but I agree, like, the original area that this game was in the original Metroid 2, it's small, and generally speaking, like, when I play it, I just kind of want to get through it and on to, like, the more impressive areas. How did you manage, or I guess, balance, like, making areas like Golden Temple or Industrial Complex or Hydro Station, expanding those out, but then just kind of keeping, like, some of the areas like we're seeing right now just a little bit smaller and true to scale from what they were in the original game?
Well, it's all about the intent. This particular area is a little bit of a platforming challenge with those blobby thingies that slow you down. And it's making the chambers where the meteors are, having some lava and not having very limited usable ground. So that will be pretty much the main set piece. The rest is pretty much connecting tissue and making that the way there a bit more interesting.
And I gotta say, like, even relatively speaking to some of the other areas, this is just kind of your more standard you're in a tunnel area, but even like just the cool like green crystals that you see in the background are there's just really nice set dressing there. So again, gives it a little bit more personality. That
would actually make it make sense, since you've been seeing these crystals where the super missiles are being produced. And after doing a little bit of research, the material that the super missiles do break in the Metroid Prime series is called cordite. And this could be that particular material. And people may make that connection if they wish, but this is in very close proximity to the industrial complex. So this might be one of the sources where they get the minerals.
I guess let me ask another question, because I feel like obviously we've seen some Metroid Prime style elements in AM2R here. Like we got a logbook, which I want to talk to you about later. We've got some synthy kind of sounds, the cordite that you mentioned. Were those some of those references to 2D or to Metroid Prime? I guess intentional, and I guess like as a fan of 2D Metroid, like I don't know. It seems weird to me that 2D Metroid just really hasn't acknowledged Metroid Prime in any particular way here. Was that something that you did like intentionally to try and bridge a gap a little bit there?
It certainly has to do with whoever is spearheading each game, how much they do consider to be, relevant. In my particular case, I do find the entirety of the Metroid universe a unified whole thing. So I take stuff from Prime into consideration, and since this game takes place after the Prime games, it didn't feel too much out of place, in my opinion.
God, these enemies, they're another one that pops up from Metroid 2 that give me a few bad memories of how much I got thrown around by these guys here, the little drills that are there. We skipped over them, actually. We were talking, but I also did want to shout out the blob enemies that you mentioned too. An underrated obstacle in the Metroid series, if I do say so. Could it not shout them out as we were getting there?
Yeah, and they would be a lot more tricky if I did keep the same timing for space jump as the original. This is a lot more forgiving, timing-wise. Yeah. So, it's more of a small hurdle.
And that's one thing with your space jump that I noticed right away. Like it really does feel like the fusion or the zero mission space jump. And Super Metroid is about my favorite game ever, but that space jump can feel a little bit particular in terms of the timing there. You're right.
Again, it really depends on the context. You really don't need to make huge use of huge vertical switches between shooting and actually space jumping that much in Super. In this place, there are some huge chambers that are very vertical, especially in this particular area. So having that much degree of control was going to be feeling a lot more natural. And also the actual Torizo fight, with the old mechanics, it felt terrible.
Yeah, right. Well, we are in the tower finally, and in fact, we are seeing our first Zeta Metroid evolution, who looks just awesome, by the way. This looks so cool. Really reminds me, actually, we were talking about Alien, it really reminds me of like a Xenomorph from Alien or Aliens. Very, very cool design. I guess like walk me through the Zeta Metroid here. Like it's very faithful again to Metroid 2. Just design-wise, anything in particular about the Zeta Metroids that sticks out?
The Zeta was interesting to design, mostly because there was this balance that they wanted to strike between making it slim, sleek, and agile, like a Xenomorph, and also making it feel like the original. The original sprite is a little bit more chunky and also flies. So this felt like a decent compromise. And besides, this was pretty much a major technical challenge to actually animate. All of the body parts are separate. They're separately animated. And they pretty much need to adjust the rotation. So the rotation of the body has to accommodate the position of the head, and the head is tracking Samus's position separately. So it was a nice challenge to actually combine all these objects that have different separate logic into one, contraption that felt like a living creature.
Wow, that is so interesting. That's so cool. I got to talk about the tower actually, because while I might say that the Golden Temple has my favorite music of the game, I think I got to give this area my overall. Like, I just think that this place is so cool. And it's really interesting because the tower in the original Metroid 2 really kind of does stand out as being this weird structure that just happens to be in the middle of SR388. What was your, what was the inspiration behind the tower and the direction that you decided to take it?
So, in the original, you get to enter the tower eventually, and inside you're going to be finding like a vertical chamber that connects to several rooms, and each one of them has a different beam weapon. And you're pretty much able to select the beam that you're going to be able to carry from this point up to the end of the game. And I always found it fascinating. Why is there a facility that has all of the weapons in the game in one single location? So I thought maybe this could be some sort of weapons research facility, and that kind of technologic vibe was pretty much the actual starting theme for this particular place.
Just a great interpretation too. And by the way, actually, I want to shout out again how much I appreciate that we're seeing a Gamma Metroid in a room full of sand, exactly like you see in Metroid 2, which is cool. But yeah, like I thought that the tower was just such a really like an ominous. Like it felt ominous in the main game, but here it just feels especially ominous. And, oh, look at this statue in the back. That just looks fantastic.
Yes, producing that statue was awesome. I wanted to actually have more set pieces like that to produce overall, but time constraints. This one luckily made it, and the actual artist that created this used a couple of what's it called? Lego Bionicle figures that were very similar to Joso.
Really?
And the guy posted in that particular post that you see there, and he pretty much traced over that, and then shaped them like Joso warriors.
Oh, that's cool. Oh man.
Yeah.
Ah,
And then
that is so awesome.
sprite shading such a huge set piece is super time consuming, but it's totally worth it.
I would say so. Yeah, just an impressive set piece here. I mean, it really just looks spectacular. This image in the back that we have here, my goodness. But yeah, to my point, like the tower to me, it felt like it's almost kind of weird because on one hand it feels like so incredibly faithful to what we see in the game, but on the other hand it also feels to me like the area with almost the most new content that's added. So it's kind of got the best of both worlds going on there.
I mean, it certainly isn't as expansive as the other areas. Everything is a lot more compressed and much more, concise. But yeah, certainly the addition of the lower part, which I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing soon, certainly made up for it.
Yeah, just I've always just really loved this area quite a lot, and that's certainly why. Another big reason why is some of the music choices that we'll get to. So the tower reinterprets the Norfair themes, both of them actually, to great effect actually, because I actually have to admit to you, like the Norfair theme, I like it a lot, but I almost felt like it's a little bit almost overdone now. But the different interpretations that we hear, like they're very like technical. Like it almost reminded me of Norfair, but like if it was mixed with Sanctuary Fortress or something like that. Just a really unique sound to those themes that we're so familiar with.
A part of the theme of the game is if you found something that's familiar, it needs to sound distinct and different.
Yeah.
And that also applies to the music.
Well, I appreciate it here. We got our... I believe this is our final Zeta Metroid of the game. I could be wrong. Don't fact check me about that. But yeah, it's too bad because I really love fighting the Zeta Metroids. That you only get to really fight them both in the original, obviously, in AM2R, really in the tower area, and not a whole lot of other places. What a cool effect, by the way, for that. I don't like the little beam, I guess, that the Zeta Metroid throws off, and the sprite for the acid just looks really cool too. I've always been a big fan of that. I don't know how you do that. Like it looks like almost 3D in a 2D space.
It's the power of very wobbly particles that one improvises.
Well, whatever that means, it looks really cool, and I'm super stoked that they're in there. Yeah, so we're just about to get rid of our final Zeta Metroid, and of course, where we are going next, as you referenced earlier, is under the tower, and this is a completely original spot that we're seeing here. Did you? I guess, like, what were the circumstances behind creating this? Did you have, like, this specific idea in mind once you kind of settled on making the tower, like, a weapons complex? Or was this just something that kind of naturally happened, like, as you kind of got into development, you thought, maybe this would be cool?
So, one of the things that I had to define early on is what's going to be showing up in this game and what's not going to be showing up, right? The very first thing I said to myself, no Ridley. It
Okay.
makes no sense to actually have Ridley, so that's it. It's going to be weird to have a Metroid game with no Ridley, but yeah, I want to be super faithful to that. What are the other typical staples of a Metroid game? Escape sequence. But then again, I didn't want to change the very iconic ending. I want it to be peaceful, you know. So this felt like a nice middle ground. Just needed a framing device to actually make it make sense. And having some sort of power station to pretty much power the rest of the facility felt nice. It also happens to be the lowest point in the map, so we can actually make it so it's a geothermal kind of location because there's a lot of magma, lava, and high temperatures here. So it almost fit in place by chance. And this sets the stage to actually have a nice justification for being running around and escaping something.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that next actually, because I mean, what is a great Metroid game without a great escape sequence like that? That is so ingrained in the DNA of Metroid. I feel like to me that I was again the first time I played this, I was just like, man, this is so awesome that we got an escape sequence in a game that otherwise didn't have one here. And a tough escape sequence too.
It's not that tough. It's all in the mind of the player. It's all manufactured urgency. The timing is super lenient, but there is a little bit of cheating here on there to actually make it, feel like there is actual pressure. And that's why I'm not showing numbers here. This temperature bar is something that I'm able to manipulate later. If you knew that you have 5 or 6 minutes to actually, complete the whole thing backwards, it wouldn't add as much tension as it does here.
And I totally
agree.
Having
a mini boss in the middle doesn't help either.
Yeah, this is just a great boss, by the way. It kind of reminds me of Ridley Robot a little bit from the End of Zero mission. Same kind of vibes there. I completely agree with what you said, though. I feel like having the bar instead of a timer just adds a level of urgency to the player that, it's one thing when you have 2 minutes remaining, so you're not as nervous, but when you don't have that specific time left, I feel like it does add a little bit of tension. By the way, I did not know that you could shine spark up this elevator until I saw this video. I had no idea.
Yeah, it's open space.
Oh man, what a cool escape sequence! Like, this is probably one of my more favorite escape sequences for the reason that you said. Just it's a little bit different, and to be honest, actually, with you, I would love to have like future Metroid games implement like this kind of, instead of a timer, something a little bit different along these lines to give you that urgency. So how long do we actually have? Do we have about 5 or 6 minutes to escape?
I have no idea. It's all very arbitrary. It's just a value that's been updated. Okay. And every couple of room transitions, the bar is being slowly nudged towards the final value. So in theory, there is a maximum time limit, but I never actually stopped to actually measure it. Huh. If you just stay put and do nothing, eventually everything explodes. But it's a long time.
Kind of reminds me almost of like the Majora's Mask. Like you got 3 days in clock down, and if you just stand around long enough, eventually the moon will fall. But in this particular sequence, actually always stresses me out because I always think that I haven't made it, even though now the player is safe, which again I thought was just like a really cool kind of fake out almost, because like the player obviously is alive but barely.
Yeah, this was going to be a lot more elaborate. I wanted to actually make it slow motion. You would get to see the shockwave, knocking her down, and you would see her flying away with smoke trails and whatever. Animating that would be very painful, but luckily, the effect that I made for the oil explosion is faster than Samus falling, so it's obscured by the explosion. No need to animate it.
Well, here we go. We are now in the ruined geothermal portion of the tower, and we got this. Almost actually reminds me a little bit of Torian from Metroid Zero Mission, because it's kind of the same idea. It's been destroyed, but you could go back and you could get some items just for your pickups and everything like that. Again, I really like kind of that idea that you can go and back and revisit somewhere after the escape sequence has happened.
I certainly do not recall having done so in Metroid yet.
Oh,
so
well,
it felt like a nice thing to explore.
It's really cool. Like I feel like it adds a little bit, and we're about to get the theme kicking in. This is one of my my favorite parts. Is when that the tower theme officially starts, and it's that energetic remix kind of version of the Norfair theme. Just an incredible touch, I gotta say. Oh no, I guess he's heading back down. Actually, he's grabbing an expansion. We'll have to wait for that theme. He missed a missile down there. That's right. That is right. Well, while we're watching him kind of go through and do, you know, a little bit of cleanup here, let me ask you a question. I guess as a, you know, obviously as a Metroidvania fan, I believe that you know, you're definitely an authority on them. I wanted to ask you, Milton, like, you talked about pacing earlier and always making sure that, like, the player is almost, like, invisibly guided to, you know, what area they need to go to next so that they're not feeling lost. How important is that to you as both, like, a developer and a fan of playing a Metroidvania game?
Well, pacing is certainly huge, especially in a game where the theme is actually giving new abilities, power, and knowledge to the player at a consistent pace. It certainly feels awesome to actually have a new tool, be able to use it, and then be challenged on that use. And if that becomes the actual core loop and it gets combined with other mechanics, even better. Again, the pace is a lot more critical in this style of games, mostly because there is a lot of mechanical execution tied to those skills.
Here we go. We are what I dare say it might be the coolest, let's call it original boss, like a creation that is completely original in the game, the Tester. Once again, walk me through what the thought process was for this boss, because I mean this is just a spectacular design, a spectacular fight, a challenging fight, visually really cool. I gotta take my hat off to you here. This was a highlight of the game.
Thanks. So part of the theme here is what is the main theme for enemies here, things that haven't showed up in other locations, right? And there is one particular enemy that has these yellowish shields that are blocking every kind of weapon, right? Until you get a plasma beam that is acquired later on in this area. So I wanted to pretty much expand on those mechanical shields here, and I thought it would be fitting that this contraption would actually have every single kind of weapon that Samus has, but in a different in a different variation, right? So you're being attacked with your very own technology, but I think that's shielded by a shield that's very powerful. So that pretty much makes it resonate like a bigger version of the other enemies that we saw around.
And like, what a cool, like, it almost reminds me of something you would see in a game like Nicaragua or something like that, like you know, one of the stick shooters. It's just a very cool, again, kind of deviation from the normal, you know, what we would expect a Metroid boss to be. It always really stuck out to me as just a very visually satisfying boss, because you've got all these beams of bullets and stuff flying around everywhere. Very, very cool touch.
Certainly, it was fun to balance it and just go wide with the amount of projectiles. Samus is very mobile, but by this point, it's very easy to actually have vertical motion that's responsive in this particular room. So, yeah, it was really fun to actually, you know, balance and you know, present this to the players. Many people say this is the most challenging boss, but again, might be that I'm actually a fan of bullet hell games and I don't find it so difficult. So it might be a bit biased.
When so I have to admit, when I was fighting the Tester the first couple of times, I kept on destroying the shields, and I was like, well, you know, this is how you got to beat the boss, and eventually they regenerate, or the little guns on the side. But I do think it's kind of one of those things. Like, once you know how to beat it, it's not that challenging. But it's cool to do it on the first try, because you don't exactly know the best strategy to defeat that boss, which I appreciate. That's
a layer that I wanted to give to that particular boss. so you don't just shower it with missiles. Having that inner shield that requires you to use the beams also tries to justify the existence of the logs. You're going to be finding that information spelled out if you take the time to actually read it.
Well, we have officially left the tower now. The tester has been defeated. You know, one question that I wanted to ask you here, Milton, because we just got obviously the plasma beam, we've just got acquired the power bombs recently. How important, I guess, is just having those like really satisfying sound effects? Like the power bombs sound really powerful. Like when they go off, they sound really explosive, and the same with the plasma beam. It sounds really good. Like how important is that in making like a game like this, where it's an underrated thing but an important thing?
It's certainly, for me, it's quite important, mostly because I come from a sound design background, and having the sound match the power of whatever you're actually using is super important for me. And power bombs have been something that I'm pretty sure were a bit underrepresented, mostly because of technical limitations. If you do remember the sound of the power bombs in Fusion or in Super Metroid, they go more like whoosh,
Yeah.
and it doesn't sound that. I mean, I guess, but I would actually expect, heat and power and a shockwave to actually hit the microphone that the virtual camera would be detecting. So yeah, trying to find a combination of sounds that actually represent that power was fun, and it was really fulfilling to actually hit it in action.
I mean, hey, speaking of fulfilling here, we are now in the distribution center, which is basically an entirely new area. This wasn't really included on the Metroid 2 map. Obviously, this area serves a function in terms of like travel, but like I guess other than that, what was the idea behind the theming and the identity of the distribution center here?
Well, this area took several revisions to get in the shape that is right now. And the main problem here was that Samus is insanely overpowered by this point in the game. So unless combat has some very restrictive enemies, Samus would be super capable of defeating pretty much anything. And the environment would not pose a challenge at all, because we have all the verticality that we want. We got pretty much the ability to fly. We have power bombs that can annihilate everything, so that's another factor. So the very first couple of revisions of this place featured plenty of spikes and projectiles, and spikes were the only thing that in the environment would actually bypass the gravity suit, because it's not heat, it's not a chemical, it's a physical thing that's actually hurting Samus. But they were not very aesthetically pleasing, so I had to pretty much start from scratch, and I came up with this idea of these EMP battery thingies that would actually restrict your guns, your weapons, if you are within the range, and that would actually used to be also as a weapon. And it kind of started, it started developing from there. I always found interesting that in the Prime games, they also used spheres or sphere-like objects for activating mechanisms. And I was like, okay, what if the JoJo also use spheres for energy transportation purposes too? So yeah, that actually led to the idea of, okay, if we have some pressure pipes in the second area, maybe there could be like a distribution network that would actually distribute this energy around the place. And that more or less led to the creation of the fast travel system that we have here.
And a pretty cool idea.
So it's a thing that led to another thing, and yeah, it's a chain of things that, the ideas kept piling up into the jar.
Because I mean, at this point, like when the game releases, we don't really have fast travel in Metroid. Like Samus Returns and Metroid Dread would do that later, but at that point it kind of was still like backtracking to where you need to be. So I remember just thinking like it was really cool idea, particularly to implement fast travel, but in like an in-game justification for having it with the logbook telling us that like this is how the Chozo get a bunch of stuff around the planet. I thought that was really interesting, and I guess just like a really smart idea.
Here's the thing: the Metroid games traditionally do not require backtracking because the world is so well interconnected. You are able to get to one side of the planet to the other in 5 minutes if you know your way, right? In this case, the layout is a huge cavern, and going from the bottom to the top of the map is very time-consuming. There is a lot of twisty patterns that you need to go through because of how this place is laid out, right? So it's pretty much a side effect of Metroid 2 being this way, that I had to pretty much add a more convenient way to traverse locations.
I'll tell you what, we have got my absolute favorite item in the Metroid series right now. We've got the screw attack. This thing looks great, and it sounds great in this game. Again, we're talking about sound design, but I'll probably ask you, this is going to sound pretty dumb, I'm sure, but it's just like the lighting. Again, those lighting particles look like they're almost 3D. By the way, what an awesome room this is. 5 Alpha Metroids coming at you. This is great.
By this time, you're officially insanely OP, so yeah, yes. I throw every the player.
Oh, this is a cool little challenge. I remember this room very distinctly when I got to it. Just a cool room here. But yeah, I mean that screw attack just looks absolutely fantastic. Like again, it looks like it's popping out of the screen almost. Just man, it looks cool.
Just a couple of additive layers and a little bit of blur, and yeah, that makes a nice trick.
And to be honest with you, actually, like even the lighting effects from these creatures, from the machines rather, that explode, and again, kind of a nice kind of Metroid Prime touch again, because it reminds me of when some of those enemies disrupt your visor as well. But just like the lighting effects here, I always thought this area was super cool. The distribution center might be the most visually pleasing area in the game, I feel like.
Thanks. It was quite interesting to find something that would actually fit the style of Metroid.
Well, it certainly did a good job, and we have kind of our, the distribution center version of the, what we've been talking about, like the gimmick or the different presentation of gameplay here. Very cool, like the EMP style, like you're not allowed to use your beams or anything like that. Gives it a very, again, unique personality. And this, oh my goodness, is this ever cool? The gravity suit, and you got to tell me if this is intentional. So we're seeing what almost looks like a Dark Samus sprite here. Was that a little Easter egg that you threw in?
That was pure accident.
Really? Oh my goodness.
Yes, really.
Well, that was a cool accident because it looks. The first time I saw it, I was like, "Oh, Dark Samus, cool."
Yeah, that was the definition of a happy little accident.
Yeah, well, that is awesome. Well, here we go. So we are, as you said, we are officially OP, and we're not done yet, actually. We've got the final item of the game coming up here in just a second, which I actually thought was a pretty cool decision. Usually in Metroid games, either the screw attack or the power bombs are kind of typically presented as your ultimate weapon, but in AM2R, it's actually the ice beam, and the ice beam in AM2R is, it's got to be the most powerful version of the ice beam that we've seen so far, and probably appropriately so. Like, this functions as you would imagine an ice beam would, like if you actually froze someone. Walk me through the idea to really add that extra bit of punch to the ice beam here.
So it's part of how the game progression evolved over time. Originally, the ice beam was located in the Chozo temple, just like the original, and all of the enemies I had to rework to feature the ability to be frozen. And there it goes. How do we actually balance that? How many shots do I need to use if I'm using the ice beam, because you can actually disable it before they get frozen, and how many more shots do we need to actually destroy them? Is that going to be an issue? Is that going to be a thing that's going to be making things complicated whenever there is a Metroid fight in the middle? And it ended up being so much of a hurdle to actually get it to work properly that when I considered relocating the ice beam to actually make it make sense balance-wise, it made a lot of sense. And suddenly, just making it overkill like it should be felt super satisfying at this point.
It really does. Like, you feel just powerful because you shoot an enemy and it falls out of thin air. It's really satisfying, to use the ice beam in this game, which I think is really cool. So I really love that decision, and you know what, like I feel like it makes sense too because the Metroids typically have one weakness, which is ice, so it kind of makes sense that you shouldn't get it until you're kind of approaching the climax of the game, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not going to be using them within the Metroid fights, then it didn't make much sense to actually have them early, the actual ice beam. So it made a lot of sense to actually push it to be thrust.
Oh, well, here we go. We are entering a room that we're going to come back to in just a quick second and have another satisfying confrontation in. Maybe I'll just skip ahead here just a second or two because we do have that boss fight coming up. You've obviously brought back a few enemies from previous Metroid games. We saw Torizo earlier, Arachnus obviously, but that made sense. We are about to see Ceres from Metroid Fusion enter the fray here, and a very different Ceres than what we saw in Metroid Fusion. Why was Ceres the right boss to bring back?
So first of all, it was a nice callback to Fusion, but I also wanted to teach the mechanic of freezing something and then shooting with missiles. Because there's a possibility that AM2R might be the first game, the first Metroid game that people play, and they might not make that connection whenever they reach the final area. So this is pretty much exposing the weak points using the ice beam and then using missiles. And all of these blocks that are being destroyed by the boss also happen to be missile blocks, so that's also kind of like a hint of you have to use missiles. So yeah, it was a nice reversion of this that also has this teaching mechanic for giving some information to the players.
I just remember I thought that it was just a really cool kind of throwback to Metroid Fusion, but one that actually made a lot of sense too, because you correct me if I'm wrong. I think that they said in Metroid Fusion that they took Ceres from SR388. So when I saw it, I was really excited. But I was like, man, that also just makes like a lot of sense. I thought it was just really clever, really smart. So I always, the distribution center is one of my more favorite areas in the game. Ceres is a big part of that. I thought that it was just really cool to see that boss show up.
Yeah, Ceres shows up in Fusion, and most of the specimens that you find in that location are from SR388. There's nothing that says that Ceres is from this particular planet, but if you see it here, it can make sense. So yeah, it's a little bit of a leap in storytelling.
Well, I'm going to ask you because you mentioned it earlier. Water levels have a certain reputation among like video game players in general, and not Metroid specifically, but just like among I think we all think of the Water Temple from Ocarina of Time or something like that, right? I guess like what makes a good water level to you? Maybe both as a player, just like an enjoyer of video games, and how did you take that as a programmer to say like, okay, like this is what I need to do to make my water portion of the game like as enjoyable as it can be?
Well, in this particular case, I try to get as little exposure. Oh, by the way, if you see a lot of spikes in this particular location, this is one of the remnants from the very early particular level. So some parts made it past. So yeah. By the way, water. I try to avoid it as much as possible. There's this huge chamber. Whenever you enter the area, you're dipping your toes, you're pretty much submerged. You need to reach the facility, and you can go below the facility to actually explore a couple of rooms, but it's not that much until you realize that you don't have the tools to properly explore the location, right? And then, yeah, just give the player the actual tools to properly explore and have them, have these locations gated fairly early, so you don't waste that much time with very uncomfortable physics. Yeah, it seems to have worked here.
It kind of reminds me of Super Metroid, which is a pretty dang good comparison to be compared to Super Metroid. But like in that game too, you can, enter Meridia or the water levels before you have the gravity suit, but you really don't have to if you know what you're doing. And I felt like that same kind of satisfaction in AM2R where, you might have to go a little bit into the water, but not a ton until you get the gravity suit. And it kind of makes you feel, I don't know, it's rewarding, I guess, to know that, on future playthroughs, to say like, I don't need to go here without my gravity suit yet. I'm not like I don't mind water levels, but they certainly can slow down the pacing if not done correctly. So I was, again, really, really happy to see, like, I thought that this is about as great as it could possibly be for, for those water levels, which I got to imagine are tricky to do for game developers.
In this particular case, when getting lost and finding your way is part of the experience, it's not that much fun to try to retrace your steps in uncomfortable physics. So the less friction we have to actually reach a proper destination, and reaching that destination being part of the actual puzzle, yeah, that's part of the charm. Just make it more convenient.
Did you ever pull off the classic move playing Metroid Prime of going to the crashed ship before you had your gravity suit, like I did multiple times?
No, I didn't play that much of Prime. Only a couple of playthroughs, and I didn't spend that much time learning the awesome skipping techniques. I'm not super skillful on those.
Well, hey, I'm right with you there. Originally, actually, if you were not available to do this commentary, I was actually going to play AM2R and do a race with my colleague who is playing it right now. And as we can clearly see, he is about 1,000,000 times better than I would have been. So that would have been very fun to watch.
Oof.
But here we go. We are officially in the item cleanup part, and we're revisiting some of the previous areas that we've been, except now we've got the power. We've got all the power and abilities. We are fully maxed up and ready to go.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to revisit after the areas were designed. I had to pretty much retrofit new challenges and places that are not too far from the teleporting points. That way we don't get long stretches of trying to revisit caves and run around and making the actual connections actually convenient.
So Game Worm just pulled off that Shine Spark puzzle seamlessly here, but I gotta admit, that's a pretty tricky one. As a fan of Zero Mission, Milton, which has some incredible Shine Spark puzzles in it, I guess, like, again, both as a developer and as a fan, like, what to you makes, like, a good Shine Spark puzzle?
It has to be forgiving. Okay. As in, if you... so, the one that shows up in the Golden Temple, which is a huge sequence, it's really tricky, but it's only tricky if you try to pull it off in one move, right? So if you take your time to observe and practice, you are able to actually have a nice flowing motion, but you don't need to start from zero, right? And some of the more tedious puzzles in Zero Mission were the kind of, you lost your charge in this particular spot, you need to go all the way back to the beginning and try again. Mm-hmm. And those are always super demotivating. Here, I can actually make some nice, huge playgrounds, but you can actually take your time to resolve every section separately. And if you wish to actually challenge yourself, you can actually do that in one go. And that's always super satisfying when you actually pull it off. Mm-hmm. I thought that particular approach was a bit more, rewarding than, very difficult, huge sequences that are super punishing.
I think I would tend to agree with you, and I mean that Golden Temple Shine Spark puzzle is particularly devious to pull off in one shot. I don't think I've ever done it, but yeah, it is kind of nice because you can at least do it in parts, and the parts themselves are easy enough to do, but like if you could pull off the whole thing, like, I mean, you just look like a rock star.
Yeah, and then again, it's all about readability. There's enough room and time for whenever you store your charge to understand what the situation is, and you may be able to pull off a couple of those in succession.
Well, here we go. We are on another new area of the game, and just an incredibly atmospheric kind of presentation that we have right here. We're back on the surface of SR388, and we are about to discover the G.F.S. How would you pronounce this, Milton? I was having an argument with someone about this. Is it pronounced the Thoth?
I believe so, yes.
That's what we said, but we weren't 100% sure. But what a cool sequence this is. Again, really adding personality and a little bit of personal stakes to that throwaway line in the manual about how the team came in and touched ground on the planet. What was the inspiration for the Thoth here?
So this pretty much ended up being like a playground for artists. I was like, okay, there is this huge ship location. I want to have just one fight with the boss and have one E-tank, and the rest is just going to be just environmental storytelling. Just go wild, have fun, and flex your pixel art. So yeah, so they did.
What a success that was. This is just like, I kind of think of it. It reminds me of, it reminds me of almost Criteria in Super Metroid before the planet kind of wakes up, and it's very atmospheric. I wanted to ask you actually about the boss that we're seeing here, Genesis. So in Metroid Fusion, Genesis is kind of like a standard enemy that you wouldn't fight until the latter portion of the game. What made Genesis the right boss for the G.F.S. Thoth here?
It was the choice of one of the artists, and I was able to make this guy work with very few frames of animation. And I do remember that the whole fight logic was coded in an afternoon. We were very blessed to actually push the game and reach the anniversary as a deadline. And I was able to just go with a very basic version that actually worked. And said to myself, well, if I have some spare time, I will polish this guy. And yeah, he shipped on the very first couple of revisions. That's pretty much how it goes. It was how simple the creature was, and sorry.
Just a very cool encounter. I loved seeing that because it really did look very creepy.
The atmosphere sells it very, very nicely.
I was going to ask you.
Not so in it at first helps a lot on just having the player's imagination play a big role on how that fight goes.
And that's so interesting. And on that same note, I was gonna say. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see maybe some of the recent the work that's been done on AM2R, but like as we saw in the Thoth there, we've had logbook entries added, we've had kind of Metroid Prime style 2 like entry from each specific trooper that was up in the Thoth there. There's a lot of kind of on the nose references to aliens and to Predator, which I think is very charming, but just some really great stuff to really give that some personality.
There's a lot of very awesome work done by these super talented individuals. They added widescreen, they added multiplayer. It's insane. Being able to actually team up with other people and kill Metroids, it was something that was unthinkable back in the day.
And I mean that's got to be pretty cool for you as both a fan and a developer, that you see like such an engaged community still, doing really cool things with your game, which was obviously such a labor of love. Like I imagine that's got to feel just like pretty cool.
It's super humbling. They do find my work as an inspiration to expand their abilities as both of the technical side and the artist side. It's insane. It's super heartwarming.
And we're seeing a bunch of stuff that has been added. We talked about the blob throwers earlier, the little, I don't know what these little guys are, but we see them floating around here and there that indicate that there's like a secret or platform or something. It's a lot of cool little touches that the community has done. So yeah, I mean, hats off to everybody that has worked on this game. I wish that I knew anything about making games. I would love to do contribute in some way too. Here we are. We are back in the Hydro Station, and we're going to a puzzle actually that I had never really considered, and I think that you did kind of a really cool job with that, which is we're minutes away from getting to a Shine Spark puzzle that will essentially start in one room and end in another. And I guess that's not like completely unique to Metroid, but it feels like we don't do it very often. I guess I always just thought that was just a really cool like little touch there. It's something that I think the series should do more of. When you have like, you know, your speed boost, you can release it in a separate room and go up to a room that's above it to actually use that speed boost. I thought it was pretty cool.
It certainly can be achieved by just using the resources that you have on that same room, but then again, sometimes it's actually cooler that to show it off, differently. And the idea is that you need to find the exact location to actually fight a missile to clear the actual amount of bricks there and not affect the ground like that. So yeah, it's precision and execution. And once you actually learn how that is, it's all about pulling it off.
Yeah, like I just thought, you know, creating a Shine Spark puzzle or I mean any kind of puzzle really, but particularly Shine Spark is always just like impressed me so much. This is the room I'm talking about here. We're about to see just a crazy accurate pinpoint precision Shine Spark that will take us into to another room here, which I thought was just like such a cool touch.
Yeah, this is about observation. To actually, we're going to be sitting from the other side, and if you take note of where we are in the map, you can actually pinpoint the exact block where you need to actually do the spark. So again, it's all about observation and checking out the minimap whenever you're exploring the lower floor.
Was it like an intentional, I guess, choice to have like at least so these orb puzzles that we see here that the distribution center activated? It's like a fun little mini challenge actually to get the orbs where they need to be into the Chozo, I guess, statue that has them. Was it a conscious choice though to include at least one of those in every area to like really incentivize players to go ahead and revisit those areas, which you don't necessarily have to in the original game?
Yep, I mean, the first reaction that people would get whenever they discover the distribution center, whenever you reach an old location, it's like, oh, this is just fast travel, and I'm in some place that I've already been. Having the people having a nearby puzzle that they did observe before, and we are giving now the context on how that actually, it's a nice little bit of incentive to explore a little bit more on things that may have left behind.
Well, we are almost done. We're actually about to hit that devious Shine Spark puzzle in the Golden Temple here, which I'm looking forward to. I don't know if Gamer's gonna pull it off in one try, but we'll see. I guess while we're waiting for him to pull this off, it's as good a time as any for me to ask you another question. And again, obviously, as someone that knows a thing or two about the genre here, you've worked on obviously AM2R, Ori, Bo. What to you? And again, I'll preface it both as a fan and as a developer. Like, what to you, I guess, like makes a good Metroidvania, like in general?
I think it's about how it feels to gain momentum. Whatever the player, the actual player character uses as a currency to go through the environment, right? The pacing, how rewarded we are with our, execution of things, right? And this could be pretty much a new ability, knowledge about the game, skill, or just mere practice. With that definition, Dark Souls could actually kind of be considered part of this type of experiences. And those also have proved to have a nice point of view on how to actually overcome these kind of things. I'm pretty sure just the pacing and how rewarding the process is, that's a key feature. It needs to feel rewarding, otherwise we're just wasting the player's time, and time is very valuable.
I'm glad you said rewarding, actually, because I kind of agree. That's one of my big things for a Metroidvania is like, especially for a game like Metroid where you're kind of getting lost in the world, is I feel like you always want to have, like, even if the player has went down the wrong path or is lost, like, I feel like you still want to give them like a missile expansion or a something to kind of make them feel like they've at least gotten something for their time, which again I feel like you've always kind of got going on in AM2R to great effect.
Certainly, I certainly do not appreciate dead ends that serve no purpose than just wasting the player's time. So if we are going to be finding something at the end of a challenge, it was just exploration.
It looks like we're done with the Golden Temple here. Maybe not. There's a couple other expansions, but yeah, we're gearing up, to get to the end here. Again, while we're waiting, we've talked in depth about areas like the tower, distribution center, a hydro station. I guess is there an area that really sticks out to you that you are most proud of, like watching back in this gameplay and being like, I really like the way that this turned out? One and you could say a couple if you want, but like one in particular that really sticks out to you.
Well, the distribution center was certainly one of my favorites, mostly because it evolved over time, and if I were to actually redesign it today with my knowledge right now, it would feel pretty different. So it's one of the few locations that I was able to express myself and use the experience I gained through this project to actually make something that's completely original and doesn't follow the blueprint for Metroid 2. So it was a nice place to actually discover how much my capabilities as a designer have evolved over time.
I mean, I felt I had a hunch that distribution center might have been up there and for me, I thought, well, it's an original area, so like that for me, I would feel incredibly proud of creating something that just feels, like a natural fit with the rest of the world that is created on this planet. So I mean,
just the people that play the game, they say it fits and it feels Metroidy. So yeah, that's huge for me.
Yeah, and it certainly does. And a big thing that we actually didn't even talk about here is. Again, like this music track, it really kind of has all the, I don't know, those qualities that I guess is hard to actually like say what they are, but what when you hear it, like that make a Metroid track, which I feel like just adds like a ton of personality and a ton of, it makes it feel like a Metroid area. A really great job of doing that.
Certainly, this particular music track was quite interesting to produce. It was an original composition by Torby Brand. He's a really awesome musician, and we had to go back and forth over Skype, changing the device settings and whatever. Skype back in the day was not as permissive with audio as Discord is right now, so having to connect the audio device to Cubase to actually be able to render the thing and share it over Skype it was complicated. But it was a very nice back and forth process, and it was really fun to actually find something that felt Metroidy, but didn't pay homage to anything.
Let's talk about music for a second too, because while we're on the subject here, one thing that I really, really love about AM2R, and I know I've said a bunch of things, but I really love that you get to hear the Surface theme like continually played, and like it does go through some variations here depending on what time of the day you are at, of course, but like I think that the theme is just, even the original Metroid 2 theme is just a fantastic theme that I wish we just got to hear a little bit more of in both Metroid 2, and in Samus Returns as well, and in here we get to hear a lot of it, which I think is like really cool, and just kind of again adds a little bit of personality into the feel of Metroid as well. So I really like that choice that was made too.
I just follow the Metroid 2 formula of indicate cave system with the actual main theme, and that's something that was amazing to actually go back to the familiar song again, as in, okay, I'm back into the right track, and that also happens here.
So we've talked about here, Milton, like how faithful that this remake is to to Metroid 2. Obviously, we've expanded a bunch of other areas, but like, did you ever consider, I guess, expanding this particular portion of the game, the nest as it's called, with the what we'll see the last evolution, the latest evolution of the Metroids that we're going to fight?
Not the area itself that much. It was interesting to actually shuffle ideas on how to introduce the first Omega. And at first it was going to be just a straight animation like the Zetas. It would just come out of the cocoon thingy and attack the player. But one of the sprite artists convinced me that we would be able to make a cinematic sequence with just a couple of frames of some GF troopers. And since the main difference between the troopers is just the color palette, it was super simple and efficient to produce. So yeah, we went with it, and it was the result was amazing.
I would say, like, I think it's just an incredible sequence, actually, and one that feels like, you know, dare I say, like, heartbreaking. Like, it feels like you're so close yet so far to these other people that are here that immediately fall when you see them. So just a really great sequence, and man, look at this Omega Metroid. Ooh.
Oh yeah, these guys were so painful to balance.
Oh well, you know, they look fantastic. The effects, that fire just looks great. But yeah, you know, anything you could tell us about the Omega Metroids, their design, how everything came to be, I'm all for it.
The Omega is pretty much trying to have the player calm down and use precision. The hit point, the actual location that you need to aim for, is in a tricky spot. So you need to time your jump and your fighting in a very particular manner, and you can only do that once you actually calm down and understood the movement of this particular beast. It's very easy to be overwhelmed by this huge thing the first time you see it, but you need to just breathe and be calm. And if you can actually use your super missiles, even better.
And let me ask you another question too. You know, we've obviously seen some areas in the game where, you know, there was a couple more Alpha Metroids than the original Metroid 2. There was a couple more Gamma Metroids. You know what? I was mistaken earlier. Actually, we even saw a Zeta Metroid pop up in the distribution center. Was there ever a thought to including, you know, an extra Omega Metroid or two? I mean, obviously you can tell we're big fans of Omega Metroid, so or did you want to keep it kind of less is more with the Omegas?
I wanted to keep it less is more, because if I made anything that was out of the ordinary, I would need to actually balance that again, and I didn't feel like I had enough time to actually have that luxury.
And I guess that kind of makes, like, when they do appear, all the more impactful as well.
Yeah, in this particular case, it was pretty much a little bit of limits on the available time we had. All of the encounters that we're going to be seeing here have the arena where they take place be pretty similar, so it counts as an homage to the original, but it would have been interesting to actually explore some ideas to actually make the environment part of the fight, as the other evolutions have been. But then again, you know, time constraints.
Look at that. I did not know that you could do that in the game. Nice little shortcut here. And now we're seeing another kind of darkened, moody atmosphere, which I think if you were going to use it again, like, certainly the tunnels leading up to the Omega Metroids feels ominous and kind of, like, tense. So it's a great use of that darkness here.
Yes, and then again, exploration is not a huge deal here. You're not going to be missing out on very huge landmarks if you're just jumping from the center part. So it's not it's mostly atmosphere setter than a navigation jump.
Pretty, like, again, like, incredibly faithful to the original game, because, like, at the original game as well, you just have these tunnels. There are very little enemies for you to interact with, and it's really kind of the absence of those other enemies and the knowing that you're about to go face to face with these hulking Omega Metroids that really drive up the tension here. So I you know what, I had to ask it, but I do kind of agree with the Omegas. Less is certainly more here.
Certainly, and you know, the anticipation is as important as the fight itself.
That is true, yeah. And let me ask you a question. I'm sure I could guess the answer here, but you know, we've seen other interpretations of the game kind of have, you know, a little bit more intricate, I guess, let's call it, like, combat in terms of, like, battling Omega Metroids or Zeta Metroids, for example. Whereas the original Metroid 2 obviously was more about your positioning and making sure that you hit the missile where it needed to go. That's obviously, like, what we decided on here in this game. Was there ever any, I guess, thought into turning the Omega Metroids or Zeta Metroids into, like, more of a, I don't know, maybe like a traditional boss battle, let's call it?
No, not at all. Having to actually make it work just with the insane amount of sprites and rotations and animations and things that was enough of a challenge. I certainly was quite aware that anything that was a bit more ambitious was pretty much going to be scope creep, and the results would be a bit outside of the team's comfort zone. We needed to do things that were achievable, and we all knew our capabilities. Going outside of that would have compromised the potential idea of this state, and that was pretty important.
And I mean, at the same time, too, it does feel incredibly faithful to the original game. Man, I love those fire shots. Again, just it feels like it's coming right out of the screen at you. Just a cool little touch there. And one thing that I really, really liked the first time that I saw it is when, just to kind of sell the idea of how powerful the Omega Metroid is, like when it throws you and you just land like flat back on the ground, I think was just like a really satisfying thing to see too, because it really kind of sells you on how powerful these Omega Metroids are.
Certainly. It always has been quite interesting to see other Metroid games having enemies that take out 4 E-tanks in one swipe, but Samus is not faced physically. It's interesting. This feels a bit more visceral, as in, we are justifying the physicality of the damage.
And I think that's like an underrated thing to have. And this is actually probably more of like movies than video games. But like sometimes you'll watch a movie, and I don't know, maybe there's like a sword fight or something going on, and it feels almost a little bit choreographed. Whereas I think adding in that physicality really kind of gets across the idea of like how intense that actually is and should be. So I really appreciate it in these fights. And just like that, the last Omega Metroid has been conquered. So we are imminently approaching the final area of the game. And one thing that I really love, actually about the original and AM2R, of course, is that from this point on, it's pretty much just like there's almost like there's nothing left as you get closer to the Queen Metroid. It's a couple enemies and then nothing. And it almost kind of infers that like these Metroids have wiped out everything else that is around there. It's really great environmental storytelling.
It's part of the original, and by this point we were so close to the deadline that just let's be faithful to the original, and that's pretty much it. And also the anticipation that goes before the final area, that was amazing in the original, and we wanted to recreate that vibe too. So having these big empty waterfall locations was just atmosphere. It's a little bit of peace before the tenseness,
storm,
and the very tense vibes of the final location.
Walk me, as we've said, I don't really know a whole lot about video game development, but like walk me through, I guess, like the development of the areas. Did they, for example, did you develop like the areas or the game kind of in sequence, or like did you start on maybe like a ladder level, pivot back to a beginning level? How does that kind of work?
So I did the areas in order, and sometimes I had to revisit some locations to apply some things that I did learn design-wise and technically-wise to improve the previous areas. And it became like a circle, right? By the time I finished the distribution center and this area, I had to look back to the very first area because it was not feeling that good compared to the rest of the game. And you get to see that jumping quality very, very obviously with that area. So I was able to improve some aspects of the first area, and I would actually continue that cycle if I had the chance. I had some ideas to actually improve the second area, and it would be pretty much a cycle until the game feels pretty much cohesive. Again, I'm the one that's in charge of this, so I'm not sure if I'm ever going to be satisfied with this. I always find things, but I mean, we made it in time for a very special occasion, and people loved it, and that's enough for me.
Well, and they sure did. They sure did. What a absolutely breathtaking area this is. I've always I've always really thought that the original area for Metroid 2, the genetics lab, was so cool, and you could see those test tubes in the back, but the way that you've interpreted the music here, the flashing lights in the background, those test tubes, like what an ambiance that is created here. Just what a very cool like part of this game.
Yeah, and Metroids are quite dangerous here.
They are, yeah. Like I've gotten caught more times than I'd care to admit by some of these Metroids here. Even with your very powerful Ice Beam, they can be a little bit tricky because unlike Super Metroid's Ice Beam or Zero Mission, like you freeze the Metroids and they don't necessarily just like freeze in place. They fall down as you would think that Metroids do, which I think is pretty cool too.
This particular room was supposed to be, luring players into bombing the very first, the blocks in the center, and they would actually trigger the two metals at the same time. It never happens.
Oh, there you go.
I did test it in a very particular way. It did work for me, but every single person that tries it, they never trigger it.
Here we are, Milton. We are at the Queen Metroid fight, and I gotta say, I completely appreciate reusing that great theme from Metroid 2. Just, I love this theme. What a cool fight this is. The entire presentation leading up to this fight, actually, I think is just fantastic. The genetics lab, the build-up, the seeing the 9 Metroids spawn again. One of my favorite story moments from the entire series, and to see it kind of recreated in a style that I connect with is just, I gotta say, man, it was just absolutely awesome the first time, and frankly, every time I've seen it.
We wanted to be super respectful with the original, and yeah, those were very iconic moments.
And not only that too, but like what an excellent sequence as well. Like when that Queen Metroid opened up her mouth to fire off the laser shot, I remember the first time being like, oh my god, what is happening? And I loved how the fight kind of progresses, and it feels more like an actual chase or like a close quarters brawl rather than the original fight did. So I really, as far as like a returning boss that was reinterpreted from the original game, this is probably my favorite of the game.
It was certainly quite a technical challenge, but the culmination of the theme of familiar but different, because the actual beginning of the fight is very similar to the original. So having this twist and this surprise was pretty satisfying to pull off.
And we've seen that. I mean, we've seen that theme throughout the entire game. Like if something, as you said, if something's coming back, it's got to be old but new. And another great example of this. I mean, it just looks like you're about to get killed every time that Queen Metroid opens up her mouth. And a more, I would say, engaging fight too. Like it adds a little bit of, I don't know, like engagement to the fight, I guess, because in the original Metroid 2, you really just have these little blob guys, and then you need to avoid the Queen Metroid's head. This one feels a little bit more, like you're participating a little bit more.
It's certainly quite a challenge to, make it not super frustrating, and certainly having this enemy thingies that actually allow you to resupply, it certainly makes it a lot more epic. You are able to withstand more damage, and that gives a little bit of leeway of making the fight more intense, because we have a resource to actually properly, stay alive.
Here we go. We are about to, here it is. We are rolling into the Queen Metroid's belly. That power bomb has been laid. That, my friends, is the final Metroid on SR388. Or is it? Here we go. So I gotta say, I love the character of the baby Metroid. And I think this moment where Samus decides to let it live is my favorite moment, actually, in all of Metroid. Such a great moment that really impacts the rest of the series here. Great theme that's playing here. Just a great moment, I think, for the series.
Indeed, and it was nice to actually be able to make this moment as special as it deserves to be. Also because it's very special for the plotline, and also how different it is. There's always a huge bombastic explosion of a planet or a base or something, And this one is a moment of introspection, both for the player and for the character itself. So
Yeah, just
I try to do justice.
a moment of peace, and I think that's just really conveyed well here. We are nearing the end of our gameplay here in Milton, so I wanted to open it up to you if there are any other, I guess, like memories, moments, anything that we haven't touched upon that stick out to you that you wanted to comment on before we end our journey on SR388.
I mean, for me, it's amazing that after almost 10 years, the game is still getting attention from people. People are playing it. Some very awesome people are updating it, and yeah, it's amazing. My original vision for this, it was going to be just a one-off thing, and people would play it, would say, "Oh, that's fine," and then move on. But seeing an entire community going so strong today, and people so interested in the game is really, really awesome. And I do thank you for this opportunity to comment on this. And yeah, I hope this has been fun and enlightening.
I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure for me and for everyone listening, I'm sure. Just to hear some of the thoughts and some of the stories and just everything that went into this game that I really love. And not only me, of course, but like the entire community has just like really latched on to just I mean, and it's just an incredible achievement. Like you really, you haven't seen a lot of stuff like this, like a full complete package like this. So my hat's off to you. Thank you for all of your work making this, and obviously thank you for taking the time here together, with us today to go over it and share some of your experiences. Just an awesome thing to have experienced with you here, Milton.
I cannot stress enough how awesome the community has been, and so amazing to both give me a hand, practically speaking, with actual assets and help with the project, but also the people that actually follow the project through the demos. The encouragement was what kept the project alive, and for that I will always be super grateful.
And you know what? I think that really just like bleeds through. Like you can see how much love was put into this. I love that the original Metroid 2 staff is credited here too, by the way. That's just a real nice touch. But yeah, I think that you just see that labor of love, obviously from yourself, from the community that's still working on this game to really make it, there is a lot of like ROM hacks or fan games, but I mean AM2R just stands head and shoulders above everything else as this really special experience that to me is like, I mean, I consider it an official Metroid game pretty much. Like it's the quality is that good. So it's yeah, thank you again for all your work and everything that went into this game. And if you're still in contact with anyone else that worked on it, you extend that to them as well, because just what a game, what an experience.
Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, I have to also thank the coverage that you've been giving AM2R in your podcast. It's part of the vibes that keep this game relevant through all of this time.
Well, hey, we're not done with our AM2R coverage yet. We've got a lot more areas to cover. Next year, we're gonna have a full 100% walkthrough on the site. So I'm gonna be playing a lot of this game. So we're certainly not done with it yet. But yeah, Milton, it was my absolute pleasure. Oh my goodness, we got a little secret scene here. What is going on? Oh, is that a Metroid Fusion theme I hear? I think it could be. I love this little Easter egg too. What a great moment. And there it is. There it is. The X-Parasite. Awesome. Milton, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and doing this with me. I really appreciate it. It was so great to meet you and connect. They say never meet your heroes, but I'm glad that we connected. This was just an absolute pleasure for me, for Omega Metroid, and for our marathon that we're running too, where this is going to be aired. So thank you just again for taking the time.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, it's I had an absolute blast. So I'm really I'm sure everyone that watched this had the same thing. It's so interesting to get your thoughts and perspective on this. We'll end it there, but again, I couldn't thank you enough. Anybody that has not played AM2R, go out of your way to do so. If you haven't, if you've not played it in a while, fire it up. It's just as awesome as you remember. Milton, I just want to wish you a great rest of your day, and thank you again for doing this for us.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Well, there it is. We hope you enjoyed the AM2R Director's Commentary Cut. Give Milton a follow over on Twitter at DoctorM64. You can check us out over on Blue Sky as well at Omega Metroid. I'm at Spiteri316. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you to Milton, and thank you to the AM2R team. You guys are incredible. We will see you back here next mission. So until then, everybody, thanks for watching. Bye.